This is Kickass News. I'm Ben Mathis.
Welcome to Good Talk with Anthony Jeselnik. The show's so easy to make, it got me back on television. And baby, I hate television. What do you think makes me such a great comedian?
Next question.
What were you expecting?
I thought it was gonna be like your last talk show.
Like, I've got a new show, make it look like the one that got canceled.
I feel like I'm in the principal's office right now.
Welcome to the seance.
I'm so flustered.
Oh, God.
Oh no! Am I supposed to answer these?
Congratulations on your continued incredible success.
Thank you, and congrats on figuring out how to get back on TV.
Hi, I'm Ben Mathis. Welcome to Kickass News. That was a promo for Anthony Jeselnik's new show for Comedy Central, Good Talk. The comedian famous for making audiences uncomfortable takes a turn at making guests uncomfortable in hilarious and often hilariously awkward interviews with friends like David Spade, Nick Kroll, Kumail Nanjiani, Natasha Leggero, and more. Good Talk with Anthony Jeselnik premieres on Comedy Central September 6th at 11 Eastern, and today Anthony joins me on the podcast to talk about his triumphant return to television. He shares how the Saturday Night Live bit Deep Thoughts with Jack Handey inspired his uniquely offbeat style of comedy, the time he auditioned to be the anchor of SNL's Weekend Update, and some pretty smart advice he got from Lorne Michaels on how to write a late-night monologue. Anthony recalls the Comedy Central roast that changed his life and what makes for the perfect roast speech. He discusses the tweet that nearly ended his last show on Comedy Central and what it's like returning to the network for his new series, Good Talk with Anthony Jeselnik. We delve into how Good Talk deconstructs the late-night talk show, why this famously confident comedian never does self-deprecating humor, the power of silence in stand-up, and the one thing that Anthony says is the most important element of good comedy. Plus, how to out-deadpan Tig Notaro, roasting a future president, and the comedic genius of HBO's Deadwood. Coming up with comedian Anthony Jeselnik in just a moment. Anthony Jeselnik is a comedian, writer, producer, and podcaster who is both famous and infamous for his unique brand of dark humor. He co-hosts the weekly Comedy Central podcast, the Jeselnik and Rosenthal Vanity Project, and now he's debuting his new talk show, Good Talk with Anthony Jeselnik, on which he switches gears from his signature acerbic style for tongue-in-cheek interviews with a few fellow comedians about their careers, their influences, and what it's like to live in his massive shadow. Good Talk with Anthony Jeselnik premieres on September 6th at 11 p.m. Eastern and Pacific on Comedy Central. Anthony Jeselnik, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I know in the intro I said that you switch gears from your acerbic style, probably because that's what Comedy Central wants me to say in their press release, but I have to say you haven't changed your persona that much for this show. There are times when you're still a little bit of a dick on Good Talk, right?
Yeah, that's what we had to say to get guests.
Yeah, okay.
You know, because we didn't have a pilot,
yeah.
So we couldn't show anyone what the show's going to be. I'm like, you have to trust me,
yeah,
and sit across me for half an hour. And even my best friends were very skeptical. So we had to kind of come up with a description of the show that didn't sound like I'm going to roast my friends the whole time, even though that's kind of what I do.
And I have to say, I was just talking to one of the people from Comedy Central here, and she asked me what my favorite episode was. And actually, my favorite was Tig Notaro, because I don't know if you knew her well before that. A lot of these are old friends of yours, but it's so deliciously awkward in the sense that I don't know if she knows what to make of you. She seems a little bit confused, and she's trying to kind of play along with what you're dishing out. I don't know. Maybe I'm a sadist, but that was the best TV for me.
That was one of the most fun episodes and challenging. I mean, but that's just my relationship with Tig. You know,
okay.
Tig
so
and
you
I
did know each other.
Oh, yeah. In Comedy Central, we had kind of fought about it because they're like, she's low energy, you're low energy. And I'm like, you don't understand the dynamic Tig and I have together. If you saw us deadpanning, talking in the corner at a party, you wouldn't want to come and hear what we're talking about. Like, it's going to be good TV, trust me.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be the case. But
yeah.
no, Tig and I go way back.
Okay. Yeah, because I love love the awkwardness, but that's just the way you guys are. That's your thing. Because yeah, you're pretty deadpan, and she is very deadpan. So
well, she'll do like the deadpan thing to kind of put you off guard, but that doesn't work on me.
Yeah.
So it ends up just being two people deadpanning to each other that I thought was really fun to do.
Yeah, and it's perfect because you sort of thrive in awkwardness when you're doing your act. You know, I mean, one thing that I like about you is you're very cool with long, uncomfortable pauses. In fact, you use silence, I think, almost in a way that like George Burns or Jack Benny used to do. You know, nowadays it just seems like comics race through a joke and get to the punch and then move on so quickly that the joke barely has time to land. Did it take a long time for you to get used to the uncomfortable silence and finding ways to use that?
No, it came pretty naturally. It's almost like in a horror movie. You know, the scare isn't what gets you. It's the tension leading up to the scare that I knew that the longer I can draw that out and keep the crowd silent and hanging on my every word, the more powerful the punchline would be. And I think even in an interview show, the more awkward it is for someone to answer a question, you're going to get a better answer. It's more fun for me to watch the guest squirm.
Yeah, I mean, that's an old school power move, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Let people hang on your words, and then you've got control. And that even works in comedy, I guess.
Oh, yeah. And we had to start, I mean, they had to kind of coach me as we went through the interviews just to smile more. They're like, Anthony, the interview starts and you're just staring dead-eyed into the guest's face. Yeah. It doesn't put them at ease. You need to do something to put them at ease at first.
Where does your dark humor come from? If I talk to your parents, would they say that you were just the sweetest little boy growing up, or would they say that this has always been in there somewhere?
It's always been in there. It got me into quite a bit of trouble when I was a kid, just because people didn't understand what I was doing. My humor wasn't quite there yet at that level, but the darkness was there. That I was just fascinated by death and horrible things. And as a kid, you're just freaking teachers out. Like if I'd gone to school before Columbine, I think things would have turned out differently for me. I think I would have been more of an outcast. But I was just obsessed with these. And I would like, the more I researched it, the more I would get mad at my teachers. Like the greatest minds in history have been pondering what happens after we die. And if I talk about it, I'm a weirdo. Like I never got that. But once I got into comedy and found the dark, the kind of the dark things I could use, it all just kind of clicked and made sense. It was like, oh, I've been building for this my entire life.
Yeah, and it's kind of ironic because somewhere I read that you come from Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. Like you grew up just a few houses or a few blocks down the street from him, right?
Yeah, I mean, not further away than that, but they filmed that show in Pittsburgh. So you would see Mr. Rogers around. It felt like I lived in Hollywood for kids when I was growing up. Like I didn't understand that every city didn't have its own Mr. Rogers, or that the entire industry wasn't based out of Pittsburgh, but loved Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what the Mr. Rogers of LA would be. I mean, it'd probably be Tom Hanks, who is now playing Mr. Rogers, I guess.
Yeah, he's as close as they get.
Yeah. And somewhere I read that you kind of found your voice initially by just copying the old Deep Thoughts by Jack Handey from the old SNL episodes. And it's funny because when I listen to one of your jokes, I can see the influence there. You kind of have the sweet, deep, insightful setup, and then suddenly at the very end, last two lines, it turns dark. And there's also that economy of words in both your jokes and in the old Deep Thoughts.
I would buy all those books, all his Deep Thoughts books. I would go to open mics and I would read them and then write my own jokes. I never copied him, but I used his style, and they were absurd the way his were absurd. And I found that even his best Jack Handey Deep Thoughts wouldn't work if you just said them to a microphone. You almost had to read them or have them read to you. That I found that you needed something a little extra than just absurdity. That once I found the darkness in it, that's when everything really clicked into place.
I remember loving those when I was a kid, but I don't know. Is there a real Jack Handey? Or was
There's
that
a real writer.
Okay, that wasn't just a made-up thing.
Wrote Deep Thoughts and then a bunch of very absurd skits. Not all of them made it to air, but I've been able to read a lot of them since. A real guy lives in New Mexico. I've tried to become friends with him. He will not let me. He's a legendary writer.
And I know that SNL was a big influence on you when you were a kid. Did you ever harbor ambitions of making it onto SNL?
It didn't occur to me when I was a kid watching it that would ever happen for me. But I loved Weekend Update, and the only job I've ever really wanted in this business, besides being a stand-up, was hosting Weekend Update. And I got like 5 or 6 years ago. I got to audition, and that was I thought those days were over. That I'd never get that chance, and just getting the opportunity to sit there behind the desk and have the announcer say your name and do your jokes for 10 people who are in there was a lifelong dream. I loved just being able to audition.
Yeah, that's awesome because I have had a million people come on who've done SNL or auditioned on SNL, but they've auditioned to be part of the main cast, not the Weekend Update. So I've heard 100 times what it's like to audition for Lauren to be in the cast, but I've never heard what it's like to audition the host Weekend Update. Is that a different process?
Completely different. You know, I have friends who have done the same, you know, done what you described, where you go into a room and you stand on a stage and do your bits for people who aren't laughing. But this was way more controlled. Like you are on the Weekend Update set. There's not that many people there, but it was me coming in as almost like a ringer versus, you know, 10 people who were already on SNL. And I think Michael Che had gone from SNL to Daily Show. So he was like an SNL guy who wasn't there anymore, but everyone else was an SNL person. So no one is rooting for me. It's Colin Yost combined with one other person doing it 10 different times, and then me by myself, Dennis Miller style. And just had a great audition, you know, and I walked out with a big smile on my face, knowing if I don't get the job, it's not my fault. You know, I didn't blow it.
So you don't do your own jokes then? They have the jokes for you, or what?
They have a big packet of jokes for you to choose from, which is part of the test. You know, see which jokes you actually choose, and then you're allowed to go out and ask friends for jokes. That's part of being resourceful. And then if you write your own, of course, that's great. So a lot of the in between joke things were mine. I had some friends help me out, but I think that was a big advantage for me. Was everyone else was going off the same playbook, and I had my own jokes. So I was getting legitimate surprise laughs from these people who aren't supposed to laugh at you. That just felt great.
Wow. And you're auditioning for Lauren, right? He's in the room? Because you also did Late Night with Jimmy Fallon, which he executive produces. When you were a writer on there, did you ever interact with him on that?
Once or twice in the very beginning. He would kind of, you don't really talk to him, but he gives you a speech. You know, he kind of imparts his wisdom. One of the best things I learned from him, he would say, you know, it's not so important. We were the monologue guys on Fallon. He was like, it's not so important that Jimmy's funny every night, but he's got to be likable every night. You can tell a joke, and he used his example, you could tell a joke about a retarded person, and the audience might laugh, but afterwards they're like, I don't like him. And you're trying to play the long game. And he would say, the longer you're there, the longer you're there. Like he talked about Conan, you know, struggling week to week in the beginning, and after a couple of years, he was just a mainstay. You know, you just have to kind of keep moving forward as opposed to getting canceled and giving up. And eventually you're just on people's TVs every night, and they're used to it.
Now, I noticed on your new show, you don't have a monologue on Good Talk. Was that part of kind of Lauren Michaels' words in the back of your head that, you know, if you do a monologue, you know that you're going to do an Anthony Jeselnik monologue, and then there's going to be that risk that you're not going to get people to love you for 10 years?
Sure. I think I kind of avoid that. I think people watch me a little bit to hate me. You know, you get a little bit of that. I just did a monologue on the Jeselnik offensive, my last TV show, and it was the hardest part of the show and basically the least rewarding. You know, you really had to have the jokes stand out. And in today's TV atmosphere, there's a million people doing monologues. So it's hard to find like a great take on a joke. And if there's no news that week, it's really tough. That I thought,
that's a lot of
why
pressure.
not just sit with my friend and I don't have to worry about topical. You know, with a monologue, you can't really do one from a couple months ago, whereas we taped all of these quite some time ago just to avoid politics.
Yeah. Which is nice. That's refreshing right now.
It's the only reason I'm back on TV. Like I've sold, since my last show, I've sold several TV shows and then given them up, been like, take the money back. I don't want to do this anymore. Things are too crazy. TV's too different now. And then I finally found something that I would actually want to do and could ask my friends to be a part of without treading on the friendship.
Yeah.
You know, it's just show up and sit down and don't prepare anything and we'll have fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, when you were back on Fallon in the writer's room, was there ever a joke that you fought really hard for that never made it onto the show?
I mean,
what's the one you fought the hardest for?
There was one. There were two that I remember. One was it was a pope or a bishop in Africa said that one day soon there could be the first black pope, and the current pope, Pope Benedict, said, "Yeah, we can have a black pope one day over my dead body." And people were just like, we can't tell this joke. And then I had one that was, you know, it makes sense. And then one that was a new study says that the pill may not be as effective in obese women. Doctors are telling those women, don't worry about it. And they were like, this is just going to make fat women hate Jimmy. And I was like, I understand, but it's a really funny joke.
Now, I know that you're also a big fan of the roasts, and you wrote, and I think you appeared on several of them, and we have another Comedy Central roast coming up soon. I don't know if you're on that one or not, but Did you grow up with that kind of stuff? The old Dean Martin roasts and the Friars? Well, I guess the Friars roast weren't on TV back in the old days. Or
I was kind of introduced a little bit through Dean Martin, but mostly through the Friars Club once they got to Comedy Central. And that just seemed like the most fun thing in the world to me. I'll never forget some of those jokes and just how mean they were. And it really kind of informed my stand-up. Like I wanted to do stand-up and so people would see me and be like, we got to get that guy in a roast. So I wrote for David Hasselhoff, and that went so well. Then I did the next three. I did Donald Trump, Charlie Sheen, Roseanne, and then James Franco. They were like, I think Anthony's too mean for this roast. And I was like, okay, if I'm not invited to the party, like I don't want to go. And I haven't done one since.
Yeah, what was it that James Franco is too likable that they didn't want to go hardcore? Because most of these are Trump, and I mean,
sure,
nobody wants to hold any punches against someone like that.
I think on that one they were trying to class it up a little bit, and they at the time they had like Natalie Portman, Kate Hudson, and they're like, we don't want Anthony going up and destroying these girls. Yeah, and I was like, I get that. Like I understand. Like after a roast, when I would do them, everyone else is kind of like talking and hugging and shaking hands and saying what a great joke, and people avoid me like the plague. Like I'm never oh, it's just Anthony now.
Yeah.
People are just terrified of me.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing that they were going for Natalie Portman for that. Was she actually on the show? Because I don't remember that one.
They all bail.
Okay.
People say
that
yes
would be
to a roast
quite
and then freak out and bail all the time.
Yeah, because as I recall, like the dais is just the strangest group of misfits. It's like the island of misfit toys. And I especially think back to the Trump roast that you did, because there was like what? Mike the Situation Sorrentino, there's Snoop Dogg, Marley Matlin, and Larry King, who's like kind of propped up in a chair. I mean, it was literally like the cast of Celebrity Apprentice.
Yeah, and that was one of the last roasts where you actually got friends of the person doing the roast.
Oh, really?
Because after the Situation bombed, they used to protect you when you bombed. You know, you might watch an old roast and they would cut to commercial and they'd show somebody giving like saying one sentence. And you're like, oh, I wonder what happened with that. That person bombed. So now with the Situation, everyone's on Twitter saying this guy's bombing, and so they had to kind of promote the roast that way.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, it wasn't just celebrities saying I don't want to be mean. Now they're saying I don't want to bomb. And then have this be like a viral thing for me. So it's gotten tougher and tougher to book those roasts.
Yeah, well, I once heard that, I guess on the old Dean Martin roasts, sometimes they weren't even in the room. Like, because they did the main event in Vegas, but sometimes people didn't want to fly out, so they would have Bob Newhart or whoever just show up at a sound stage and put up a podium, and they would film him and then do reaction shots and all that.
Yeah, that's exactly what they did.
I mean, that's got to be the best writer's room to work in. What was that like?
The writer's room was more fun than doing the actual roast.
Really?
Doing the actual roast, you're on your own. You're just trying them out every night. You're scared someone's got the same joke or has got a better joke. When you're writing, it's just me in a room with 8 other assholes just saying the worst things they can. Like the things that we would laugh at the most, we could never use. But it was like you'd be there at 2 a.m. just saying something horrible about Jeff Ross and just dying laughing.
Yeah, and you finally got to go on stage for the Trump roast. And you've said that moment really made you as a comedian in a lot of ways. What makes for a good roast speech?
I think just being surprising, being unexpected, because there's so many people who just do the same thing. You think a roast is a stepping stone to fame, but there are a lot of people who've done them that you've never heard of. So you really have to go up and crush it. And Whitney Cummings was kind of my role model for that. It was like she came out of nowhere and just blew the roof off the place. And I was like, that's it. You just go in like Darth Vader style and just kill everyone in the room. And that was my only goal.
Now, when you did the roast for Trump, was he a good sport? Because he's not a good sport about anything now. He has zero sense of humor.
I mean, he'd done several roasts on his own. Like Jeff Ross had roasted him several times before that for like private things. But I remember during the roast, they had to go talk to him and say, "You're not laughing." If I tell a joke about Donald Trump and Donald Trump laughs, they cut to Donald Trump. If they don't, if Donald Trump doesn't laugh, they stay on me, and it makes it look like he's having a bad time. So he learned pretty quickly to make it about himself and to laugh a little more and be a good sport.
That's so funny.
But you could see what hurt him. If you talked about money, that hurt him. Everything else he was totally fine with.
That's funny. Women he was fine with.
Women, kids, anything. Like telling him he had cancer, he didn't care at all. But if you made fun of him failing out of the casino business, he was
oh man,
he was upset. Yeah.
We're going to take a quick break, and then I'll be back with more with comedian Anthony Jeselnik when we come back in just a minute. White Castle is America's first fast food hamburger chain, as well as the slider experts. And now you can get White Castle sliders in the grocery store. Made with 100% beef patties on a bed of steamed grilled onions, they have the same one-of-a-kind taste that White Castle has been serving in their restaurants for years. And whether you're a vegetarian or a meat eater, White Castle sliders come in a whole bunch of tasty varieties for just about anyone to enjoy. Feeling a little cheesy? Just try their cheese sliders. Looking to add a little spice to your life? Just have a taste of their jalapeno cheese sliders. One bite and you'll understand what all the crave's about. Folks, I've been hearing about how good White Castle burgers are for my whole life. And then a few years ago, I was in Chicago one night and asked my buddy who lives there to take me for a real White Castle experience. Trust me, I didn't have to twist his arm. White Castle burgers were his favorite treat since childhood, and he said he just about lived on them his whole 4 years in college. That's the night I got hooked on White Castle's cheese sliders. I'm not embarrassed to say that I probably ate just about a dozen of them that night. There's just something so simple and satisfying about meat, cheese, and onions on a pillowy, soft bun. Let me tell you, it was a tough adjustment when I came back to California, and there weren't any White Castle restaurants to be found. Believe me, I searched. But now White Castle has come to my rescue with sliders in my local grocery store. Now you know that White Castle burgers are iconic, and their fans like me aren't just going to settle for anything less than an authentic White Castle experience. So I'm thrilled that their microwavable sliders do really live up to the name White Castle. I popped 2 cheese sliders in the microwave, and just 60 seconds later, it took me right back to that night in Chicago so many years ago. They even have breakfast sliders with a variety of flavors, perfect for when you need a quick hot breakfast on the go. From the castle or the grocery store, you can satisfy your crave anytime with White Castle. Go to whitecastle.com/kick to get $1 off your purchase of any 4 or 6-pack of White Castle sliders. It's a new season. Antonio Brown is on the Raiders, Le'Veon Bell is with the Jets, and Odell Beckham is in Cleveland. But one thing hasn't changed: where you should put your money down on all the games. MyBookie is the place to bet on football every weekend. MyBookie has better bonuses and more prop bets than any other sports book. This year, they're hosting the first online handicapping super contest. First place is guaranteed to win at least $100,000, and it only costs $100 to enter. All you got to do is pick 5 NFL games against the spread every week to climb the leaderboard and score your share of the huge cash prize pool. MyBookie has live in-game betting on every NFL game. They've got the most rewarding player perks in the business, and you can even bet the over-under on how many fantasy points a player will score each game. Join now and get up to $1,000 first deposit bonus and double your first deposit. Use promo code KICKASS to activate the offer. Visit MyBookie online today. That's MyBookie, and don't forget to use the promo code KICKASS. That's KICKASS when creating your account to claim the bonus. Bet, win, get paid. And now, back to the podcast. Now, I remember a couple of years ago on your Thoughts and Prayers special, you vented about your previous show on Comedy Central, the Jeselnik offensive, and how I guess supposedly Comedy Central threatened to shut you down over this one tweet after the Boston Marathon bombing. Mm-hmm. When you started your new show and you went in to have a meeting with Comedy Central, did that come up this time? Was there a conversation about keeping Twitter and the show separate, or what you can or can't say?
No, I think that was, and I'm kind of known for, making jokes the day of a tragedy. I think that was just a perfect storm of, someone high up at Comedy Central being from Boston, taking it very seriously, and being right on the cusp of getting renewed. If that had happened week 2 as opposed to week 9, it wouldn't have been as big a deal. But the reason I'm back at Comedy Central is because there's been turnover up top. The people that I was angry with about the Jeselnik offensive are gone. So I thought the only reason I'm coming back here is to do a show that's conflict-free. That really the only fight we ever got into in the entire time we worked together on season 1 was the title. Everything else was very easy, and it was designed to be that way. I didn't want TV to have to be so difficult.
To their credit, at least they gave you an option. I think of someone like Gilbert, who just, lost his livelihood from the Geico commercials just because he made a few tweets after, I think, what was it, Fukushima or something like that. Yeah, it's crazy that can happen now.
I think that my theory is that one tweet, you're going to be okay. You know,
Oh, yeah?
people might get mad, but it's going to be okay. Multiple tweets, you're going to get in trouble no matter what. And Gilbert had multiple tweets.
Yeah.
I just said the one.
Okay.
I still think it was defensible. It was just one person who, frankly, had no business getting involved in what I do, making the call, which is what upset me so much.
What is the secret to your longevity, sort of almost in spite of yourself? I mean, in the age of social media and manufactured outrage and social justice warriors where people just immediately grab the torches after one offensive tweet, how do you still have a career in this environment right now?
I think because I always just live in that environment. You know, it's the guys who want to be like the everyman and then they want to make a joke about black people. You're like, what is this? But if every joke you say is awful, then you can't really get mad at any of them. And now I'm just the guy who gets to do it. You know, my name is almost synonymous with it, that I'm never worried about, is this too far? I'm allowed to take it too far.
Now, with Good Talk with Anthony Jeselnik, I noticed that it's more of an interview format than the previous show. A few years back when you had the Jeselnik offensive, I read at some point that I guess you initially tested out doing celebrity interviews and then decided to scrap them for more of a panel style. Good Talk is straight up interviews, almost in the vein of like a Charlie Rose or Tom Snyder, Actors Studio type thing. What changed? Are you more comfortable with the role of an interviewer?
Yes, I am. And also the interviews on the Jeselnik offensive would have been like someone who's got a book coming out. It wouldn't have just been a comic that I was like,
someone who had someone to plug.
Yeah, like I don't need this. But talking to comics about comedy is one of my favorite things that I can do. And I'm lucky enough that I'm surrounded by friends who have been in the business for nearly 20 years. I've been in the business almost 20 years. And I like the idea of,
You're that old.
18 in October, 18 years in October. But I just don't think there's a comic alive that I can't look in the eye. And that I liked bringing that sort of aspect to the show. We're going to talk about comedy, but we are equals here. As if Charlie Rose was an expert on, you know, everything he talked to, you know, his guest about, that environment or that sort of format just seemed like it'd be fun to break out of. It's such an even stayed format that if you do anything absurd, it really sticks out. That was the most fun part for me.
With all these interviews, have you learned anything?
You know, it's funny. People keep asking me that, and I feel like I've taught more than I've learned.
Oh yeah,
and that like
of course you did.
That I had like one person because we really think about these questions and why I want to ask certain people certain questions, and like I asked Kristen Shaw, you know, do you think all comedy comes from surprise? And she's like, no. She's like, when I do a bit, it's, you know, me doing this horse dance for 5 minutes, and it's not. And I'm like, well, the surprise is you haven't stopped. You know, the surprise is that you keep on going. That's a surprise. And she's like, oh. And since we've talked several times, she's like, I keep thinking about that. You know, you keep making me rethink the way, like, what my comedy is. And I think that's great.
Yeah. And I like the set because it's not the traditional kind of desk and couch setup of a late night comedy show. It almost kind of reminds me of the old Charlie Rose show where you're around a circular table. And what was that? I think David Spade at one point said that it reminded him of a seance or something.
And at first it was just a black curtain like Charlie Rose and then a desk. And they were like, this looks too cheap. We need to like make it look a little better, like a little different. And now it basically looks like my apartment.
And another thing that I love about it is that when you're doing the interviews and sort of playing around with some of the traditional elements of a late night show, it's almost like you're deconstructing comedy and deconstructing the whole genre.
We throw a little bit of comedy under the bus, you know, when we can. And that was the point of wanting to do clips. I mean, this was originally supposed to be a clip show where I would just have a comic on and introduce clips. And it was so tough to get clips. It was hard not to be throwing someone under the bus who Comedy Central wanted to work with one day. You know, but there are certain things in comedy that I think are so hack and have just been done a million times that I wanted to kind of showcase that. And it just became very difficult to do. With what we had, that I think in season 2 and moving on we won't use clips as much.
Oh really?
Yeah,
I kind of like that. I'll be honest, like, because the clips are always making fun of every comedy from the 80s, making fun of their looks or just completely dated humor about, I forget, iPods or something like that.
But you can only do that like once really, and then it's like, well, now what's next? You know, after we get rid of those, it was like, I hate when people end a set with a callback. You know, I don't know if you know what that means, but they reference something earlier in the show, and at the end, out of nowhere, they just kind of say that line again and say goodnight. And people are like, oh, great. They clap and accept it. And I'm like, you know what you're doing. Like, you know how that trick works. That I can't believe great comics who do it. That I wanted to showcase that. But how do you show both? You know, you could show the end of every set, but you've also got to set it up, and it was too unwieldy. And the conversations, frankly, were so good that we didn't want to lose any of it just to throw to a clip package.
I'm trying to think if you've ever done a callback.
I may in my 4 hours that I've put out, maybe one, but definitely not, I didn't end on one.
Yeah.
You know, I doubt I even did a callback.
Yeah. Well, what is your definition of a hack comic? What is that for you?
To me, it's someone who's doing what they think the audience will think is funny, not what they think is funny. Like, I'm clearly doing what I think is funny. I'm trying to convince the audience. Hack comedy is they're going to laugh at this. They have to. You know, like, this joke's going to work. I've seen it work a million times. That's hack, you know.
Yeah, and in one of these interviews, I think that you say that you believe that self-deprecating humor is a crutch. What do you mean by that?
I don't think it's a crutch. I just think it's a different form of humor. I think it's easier to get people to laugh at you than it is to laugh at themselves or their own beliefs. Like, when I would go, and let's say I would go to Dayton, Ohio to do shows, I would make fun of Dayton, Ohio for the first 10 minutes, and they'd hate me for it. And then I have to get them back. And people would say, if you would just make fun of the next town over, everyone here would feel comfortable laughing. And I'm like, yeah, but that's too easy. You know, I don't want to do that. So if you go up on stage and you make fun of your shirt or you make fun of your haircut, it's like, asshole, you got that shirt. You know, you asked for that haircut. Like, I don't understand why you're doing what you're doing. And I mean, I get why they do it, but I just knew I could never get away with it.
Yeah, and you also don't do a lot of biographical stuff. You talk about your parents or you talk about your brother, but they're fictional stories usually. Do you just feel like it's lazy? It's kind of easy pickings?
I think it can get a little boring. I think you have more opportunity in fiction to, you know, to pull a joke out of somewhere. If I have a great story, I'm happy to tell it. But you know, I'm not that into sharing myself with the audience the way a lot of people do. It's like, oh, it wasn't that funny, but they were so brave. Like, I want funny. I don't want to hear your horrible story. I want to see I want to see great jokes.
Yeah. You actually get into a conversation with another comedian about what is the most important aspect of comedy, and you say surprise. You really believe that surprise is the biggest factor.
I think it's almost the only factor.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, how does that work with you? Because, I mean, here you are. People kind of know your act. You're famous now for your dark brand of humor. Don't they kind of see it coming? I mean, where is the surprise?
They know something bad is coming, but they don't know exactly what it is. You know, it might be a cat jumping out or it might be an alien jumping out. You don't really know. That it makes it harder on me. The joke's got to be that good. So people know what they're getting. It's not as fun as it was when I was just some, you know, random white kid walking out on stage and dropping these bombs on people. But I still have to make the joke even better just to keep the surprise going.
Yeah, I mean, that's got to be a hell of a amount of pressure.
Yeah. It is. I mean, the more famous I get, the more pressure I feel to live up to that bar that I've set for myself.
Yeah. Yeah, but what a nice problem to have, having people actually show up for you now, knowing what they're getting into.
It's a champagne problem, but I see comics who are just famous, who people just want to see. So they can go up and just talk about whatever, and talk about being famous, running into Kevin Hart at the grocery store, and people are happy to buy tickets, but I don't work that way.
Yeah. Now, who are the big comics that influenced you? Again, that's another question that I hate to ask because I know that you get it asked it all the time. But
please,
I'm assuming people that kind of were in the similar Stephen Wright or someone like that.
Stephen Wright was huge for me. He was maybe my number one.
Really?
Mitch Hedberg later on, because I discovered him later on. Sarah Silverman was monstrous for me because I never thought about being a comic because comics were so uncool. You know, they were just such like nerds that Sarah Silverman was like hot and cool and hilarious and unapologetic that I thought that's what I want to be.
Now, you often end with the segment that's called Make God Laugh, where you ask one of your guests to talk about a comedian, maybe someone that they actually knew who's no longer with us. Do you have someone who's that for you?
I mean, you know, right now it's still Brody Stephens for me. You know, I was close with Brody, and like a lot of people were, and that's still pretty fresh. So I think two people chose Brody Stephens on that thing. I thought for sure someone would say I want Mitch Hedberg. No one's wanted Mitch Hedberg yet. I never knew. I didn't know Mitch. Greg Giraldo was a big one for me coming up, but I didn't know a lot of the comics who passed away, who we ended up using. I never met Bernie Mac. I never met Mitch Hedberg. But yeah, those two guys, a guy like Brody and a guy like Giraldo, will always be missed.
What about the old guys, like really old? Because I mean, your format is a classic format. When you tell a joke, it goes all the way back to like Henny Youngman, that kind of thing. It's like the setup, punch, move on.
Honestly, comedy just doesn't age that well. That if somebody was like, I want to talk about Henny Youngman, I'd be happy to show a clip, but it doesn't work. Take My Wife, Please was hilarious at the time and does not work anymore. So I'd be happy to go and find them.
The formula is forever. I mean, the formula lasts.
Oh yeah. I mean, Henny Youngman was doing dead baby
still
jokes,
doing the same thing.
Back in the day. That I would absolutely use them. It just seems like let's do people who are kind of more current. And again, it's hard to find clips for people.
Yeah,
it's tough. It would be tough to find a Henny Youngman clip.
Yeah,
if it's not on Netflix, HBO, or Comedy Central, like it's gonna be tough.
Yeah, that would make for a bit of a snoozer, I imagine.
And no comics ever talk about Henny Youngman. As old as you'll get is maybe Rickles or Rodney Dangerfield or something.
Yeah,
but,
I mean, not now that the Friars Club is gone, or the one in LA is. I remember I used to go there, and like Milton Berle would be talking about Al Jolson. Like, it would be Berle and like I forget, like Buddy Hackett, and everyone would be like, "Who was the greatest entertainer that lived?" And everyone would chime in, "Jolson, oh Jolson." Like, who knows Jolson today?
The New York Club is still very much open. I remember when I worked on Fallon, they gave us all memberships for like Christmas or something.
Oh, how cool!
And I never went once.
Oh, really?
I was just like, wait, the point of this club is for people to sign up so they can meet me. No, thank you. Like, I'm not doing that.
Speaking of making God laugh, what's your deal with God? Like, I think you say that you're, I forget, maybe I'm going to say this wrong, apatheistic?
Apatheist, yeah.
What is that?
It's that I just don't care. Like, I don't care if there's a God or not. I've never been religious. I was raised Catholic, and very early on was like, nope, I don't believe any of this. And my parents forced me to go through it until I was 18. And then still tried to kind of keep me on it, and I rejected it hard. And I would say I was an atheist, and people would argue with me. They'd be like, "You can't really know, Anthony. You can't really know for sure. So you're an agnostic, which means you're basically Catholic." And I was like, "I'm sick of this." And once I heard apatheist, I was like, "Great. I don't care if there's a God or not. I'm going to act this way. And if I end up in hell, so be it. I don't believe in it, but if I end up there, I'm not going to be like, wait, what's going on?" It's like, all right, I had a good time.
Yeah. To be an atheist or to believe in God, you have to really have a lot invested and care a lot about that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think if I hadn't been raised with Catholicism, I wouldn't care at all. Religion wouldn't occur to me. But Catholicism was so forced on me. Like they say, there's no one hates Catholicism more than a lapsed Catholic, and that's exactly what I am. But yeah, it just doesn't. The conversation doesn't hold interest for me, and I don't feel like I need to make fun of someone for their own beliefs.
Yeah.
If you want to believe in it, great. And there's plenty of good things about religion, but I couldn't care less.
Yeah, because it can get mean-spirited on both sides.
They can argue from a place of privilege, and that's what I despise most. When I say I hate religion, I'm talking about the Christian right. And their way of saying, well, in the Bible it says, shut the fuck up. Like the Bible, which version? King James? Because that's been changed a million times. Like you have to argue from a scientific basis. You can't just argue from a place of privilege, and they often do.
Yeah. Well, before we go, here you are. You've built this very clearly defined persona as a dark comic. Do you ever feel trapped by the persona that you've created, kind of like it's a Frankenstein's monster?
No, I've realized early on when I started that you couldn't get into that persona. You could get out of it easily if you wanted to, but there are a lot of comics who have been doing it for decades who would love to go dark, and they can't because the audiences won't accept it from them at this point. But if you start dark, you can always soften. You can always become the good guy. If you need to. Like I often use the example of Al Swearingen on Deadwood. If you ever watched
Didn't you work on Deadwood?
Mm-hmm. I was an accounting clerk on season 2. Love that show.
Yeah.
But like Al Swearingen is set up as the big bad guy.
Right.
And then a couple episodes in, they bring in somebody worse. And so now you're rooting for Al Swearingen. He's still cut some throats and killed some whores, but he's the good guy now because there's someone worse. And I like the idea of, as my career evolves and I evolve, to be on the right side of things, but the scary one who's on the right side of things. Nobody wants to debate me.
The Al Swearingen of comedy. That's perfect.
Yeah.
And I love that because there's so much dark humor in that show.
Oh,
how long were you working on it?
I just the second season, but it was the best time of my life.
That was a good show.
And I watched all 3 seasons every year.
Did you watch the movie that they just did?
Yes.
I thought it was good. Did you?
I did.
Like it?
I thought it was a loose rehash of the season 3 finale. Like they hit a lot of the same beats.
Right.
It's great to spend a time in that world again. And I'm not ashamed to admit that I cried at the end.
Yeah.
I cry when Al dies.
Yeah.
It was tough.
And I mean, they didn't try to pretend like 15 years hadn't passed.
Mm-hmm.
Like these would be very different people down the line.
Yeah,
So,
I think all the actors
like
were happy they didn't have to go to the
Yeah.
gym
Yeah.
and dye their hair. Yeah.
Well, Good Talk with Anthony Jeselnik premieres September 6th at 11 p.m. Eastern and Pacific on Comedy Central. Anthony, thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me, man.
Thanks again to Anthony Jeselnik for coming on the show. The series premiere of Good Talk with Anthony Jeselnik airs this Friday, September 6th at 11 p.m. Eastern and Pacific on Comedy Central. Keep up with Anthony at anthonyjeselnik.com or on Twitter at Anthony Jeselnik. Hey folks, good news. White Castle sliders are available at the grocery. Made with 100% beef patties steamed on a bed of grilled onions, they have the same one-of-a-kind taste White Castle has been serving in their restaurants for years. And not a minute too soon for me. I've been craving their cheese sliders ever since I went to a White Castle in Chicago years ago. And their store-bought sliders are the real deal. 60 seconds in the microwave and I'm having that same authentic White Castle experience just like being in the restaurant. Pick up some sliders from the grocery store and make it a slider night. Go to whitecastle.com/kick to get $1 off your purchase of any 4 or 6-pack White Castle sliders. If you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and rate and review us while you're there. 5-star ratings and detailed reviews are one of the best ways for new listeners to discover the show. You can also follow us on Facebook or on Twitter at @KickassNewsPod and recommend us to your friends on your social media. For more fun stuff, visit kickassnews.com, and I welcome your comments, questions, and suggestions at comments@kickassnews.com. For now, I'm Ben Mathis, and thanks for listening to Kickass News.